years in HR, I've seen a lot. And not just from some companies, but from all companies. You name it, professional services, finance, tech, startup, global, pick your poison. And along the way, I've seen some good HR practices and some not good HR practices. Today, I'm here to shed some light on why HR is absolutely necessary at each step in business, because the cost of not having HR is just too catastrophic. Today, we'll delve into a few key points every business should know when it comes to their success and human resources. First, why HR even matters in business. What the HR needs are at each stage of business maturity. Common mistakes companies make with HR, and how to make sure your company is successful using HR. People often think HR is just about hiring and firing. Well, it's much more than that, and the more you know, the better your company will be positioned. I'm going to touch on a couple of key points, but there's a breadth of benefits to having HR that go beyond this list. Let's delve into the first. First, HR provides proper infrastructure for your companies. One way that we do this is by helping companies to set their hiring goals, including staff, so that they can grow effectively. HR understands the market, so they know where to find people with certain skill sets, how to attract them, how to assess whether or not they'll be a good fit. Interviewing is actually a skill, and if you hire the wrong person, you're ultimately wasting your time and resources. It costs 1.5 times someone's salary to replace them when you factor in the money spent for advertising for a position, training, benefits, and of course, the most expensive item, which is time. Working with HR professionals who are well-versed in finding you the right person the first time around is a worthwhile investment. HR ensures your company is complying with employment laws. We put policies in place that address anti-discriminatory behavior, also manuals and trainings so that you and your employees are not violating employment laws, which can come with hefty fines and reputational risk. Just a quick thing to mention here. The EEOC handles all employment violations, and 95% of the time, their cases end in settlement. Settlements typically range from $40,000 to $300,000, and of course that can be more if you're a larger company with more resources. So that means if any of your employees file an employment lawsuit with the EEOC, you have just a 5% chance of not settling. This is something a lot of companies don't pay attention to the way that they should. When you utilize HR, we ensure that you have the proper documentation in place to remain compliant with the law. And something else a lot of early phase companies don't think about, compliance documentation should be in place before you hire. A lot of the times, business owners don't think about employment documentation until after they've hired a few employees. That's a big mistake. You're leaving yourself open to litigation, and you want to protect your business because you've worked really hard to build it. HR is a gatekeeper of that. HR manages conflict in the workplace and with business partners. Conflict is unavoidable. At some point, you will have conflict if you have a relationship with someone. And employees, business partners, and vendors are no different. They may have conflict with each other, you may have conflict with them. And I know that people think, if I don't like this person, I can just fire them because we're under employment at will. No, that's not true. If you don't have the proper processes in place for termination, you're putting yourself in a position to get sued for wrongful termination. Retaliation is the #1 reason employees sue companies. So it's not enough to say, I can get rid of this person because I don't like them or they're causing too much conflict. You have to be able to manage conflict because as you grow, that's an inevitable part of management and sustainability. HR is trained on conflict management. They can teach you and your staff how to handle conflict because as we know, any work environment that is filled with conflict is considered a toxic work environment and nobody will want to work for you. And in many instances, customers may then not want to buy from you. So in the day and age of Glassdoor and employee reviews, you want to make sure that your business is a preferred place to work. That's also how you get customers because they want to frequent an establishment that people enjoy working at. And also, when you're looking for talent, people will want to come work for you. Helps retain staff. HR is responsible for keeping a pulse on employee satisfaction. who are the first people that employees come to. HR is trained on how to speak to employees to get to the root of their issues and resolve them. How many times have you gone to HR or heard of someone going to HR and they say they didn't even do anything? Well, that's ineffective HR. Every complaint should be investigated and followed up with. Now, this doesn't always mean that the outcome is going to be in the complainant's favor. It means the issue was thoroughly evaluated and an objective decision was made based on the facts of what was found. If you're a smaller company, you might consider outsourcing HR because most business owners simply don't have the time to spend on this, nor do they always have the ability to do this correctly. Turnover is always disruptive, but it's especially disrupted in the beginning and the growth phases of your company because you really need stable people so that you're not stretched too thin. This is a part of working smarter and not harder, and you can't afford to have a revolving door of people. You'll never get to where you need to go as a business if that happens. We identify training and workforce needs required for business growth. We all know the world is evolving, and with all of the digitization, especially with AI, which many people are scared is going to replace them, well, smart people actually know these tools actually make us more efficient. But we still need humans to do certain services. So what you need to understand is the training that you and your team will need to get your business to its goals, and the systems and processes that can assist with getting you there. When you go through this exercise, it also helps you identify what positions you'll need to hire for and at what time. This is something that HR helps with so you're not blindly hiring people and overhiring or underhiring or hiring the wrong type of person. Or perhaps you're hiring too many contractors and it may be better to hire one full-time person. These are just some of the things that we evaluate in HR, and I know a lot of times, especially for smaller companies, they don't look at these things, so then they're not positioned to take on larger projects or contracts, and that's a potential loss of up to millions of dollars. So you want to focus on growing your business, and that cannot happen without an effective people strategy. We manage your payroll and benefits so your business is competitive in the marketplace. I don't know if this is alarming news, but pretty much everyone goes to work because they want to get paid and they need benefits for survival. So making sure that you have a proper payroll system and benefits administration in place is imperative. There's a lot of companies that specialize in doing these things distinctly because there's a lot of complexity in payroll and benefits. There's different taxes and withholdings for payroll by state. There's different benefits that you have to offer by state. So if your company is in a multi-state location, or perhaps you have remote employees, you have to abide by pay and benefit laws in those states. That's not only taxes, that's things like paid time off. And if you have remote employees, which many of us do nowadays, you have to consider how you track their overtime if they're eligible. How do you even know who is eligible? Do you have a timestamp process in place for remote workers since they cannot physically clock in? These are just some of the considerations when it comes to pay and benefits, and you want a seamless process that's going to help you attract and keep your staff. So it's very important to make sure that you have this handled by the right HR. Each business is in a different stage of growth, and HR is needed at each and every one of them. There are general HR services that are required at each stage of business, but certain parts of HR, I would say, take more precedence depending on what stage of business you're in. In the early phases of business, you're establishing your foundation. Whether that's you alone, as a solopreneur, or if you have a few business partners, you will need to have some sort of team in place. And this may not be actual employees just yet. Maybe it's an accountant, an attorney, perhaps a marketing person. These are folks that can be outsourced, freelancers, but it's critical that you get quality people on your team from the beginning. That initial team is the foundation of your success. And if you're fortunate enough to have employees early on, they not only have to believe in the business and you as a leader, but they also need to have the competence and skills to assist you in your growth. HR manages the hiring process and getting you the people you need so that you can focus on the core parts of your business. Compliance. As we discussed, You need to have the right policies and procedures in place before anyone comes on board to make sure you're not putting your business at risk. What's not documented does not exist. Trust me, when I deal with employment attorneys, they are only concerned about documentation. Any employee can have a viable case against you without it. So laying down the foundation of proper documents, employee handbooks, policies, onboarding materials, employee acknowledgments, all of those things is critical before you bring people on board. In the growth phase, well, when you're growing, that means you're hiring. The last thing you want to do is hire in a rush. As we talked about, the cost of a bad hire is just too high. So HR makes sure that you're hiring the right people and also that you have what we call a pipeline of people in the market to tap into when you do need someone of quality pretty quickly. That also means identifying the best type of employee for the type of work you need, whether that's an independent contractor, a temp, or a full-time employee. Organizational design. In the growth phase, you may be up to 50 employees. Now you need a proper org chart with management, leadership, and individual contributors so everyone is clear on the roles and responsibilities in the company. HR will work with you to design what that looks like now, and you'll prepare for how your org structure will change as you grow. Training. You will need more generalists and specialists in a growth phase. Employees will need to have learning agility and wear many hats because you're still fairly lean. HR determines what training is needed for specific employees based on what the business goals are so that you can maximize the output of your employees. There's nothing worse than hiring people and they're sitting there idle for half the day. We get your employees up to date on the skills they'll need to achieve your business goals. Retention. It's important at this phase to manage turnover. There's a lot of work in the growth phase and employees can get burned out. So HR becomes pivotal in making sure that someone is keeping a close eye on the needs of employees. During the pandemic, there were severe cases of employee burnout because people were managing personal stress with work stress. And the companies that ended up thriving were the ones that understood their employees' needs and acted on them. This is one of the things that HR does. Monitoring employee well-being, who's leaving the company, why, what programs, benefits, training, work environment needs to change so that your employees want to stay and work for you. Mature phase. Retention. As a mature business, you're a significant name in the market and hopefully with a good brand, which on one hand means that you're able to attract good quality employees, but on the other, your employees may be poached by other employers. In a mature phase, HR will evaluate the competitiveness of your benefits and pay at least once a year. Institute employee engagement surveys, have training and development programs in place so you'll be large enough where people have room to grow. Succession planning so that if a business leader leaves, there's someone who can keep the business running. And all of these things are done annually and cyclically. Conflict. Not only is it more money, more problems, as they say, but more people, more problems. At the mature phase in business, you should have an in-house HR staff to manage day-to-day needs of your employees. If you have HR items that are outsourced like pay and benefits, someone from HR internally should be checking that information because despite what you think, even professional HR companies can mess up too. So it's good to still have someone in HR who audits this information. If you decide to have a PEO, which is a professional employer organization that handles all of your HR, you need to be meeting with them regularly. And I recommend that you have some of those employees from the PEO on site so they're connected to the business and your employees. Engagement. Employee engagement is highly related to retention, so instituting a formal practice of engagement surveys annually that's evaluated by HR is recommended. At this phase, you won't know everybody, so you'll have to rely on your managers and their teams. There should be formal training, not only for employees and their development, but for managers as well, because you may have heard the popular saying, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. So investing in developing your managers is the key to keeping your employees happy. In a global phase, well, expanding globally means you need to hire internationally. This means that you need multiple HR people in each country who understand local laws and customs. Also, there needs to be cultural training so employees can engage with one another and not say something offensive inadvertently. Change management. There will be a lot of change that occurs here. You'll need to sit with HR to design a new org structure where you now have to look at global reporting lines. You may have redundancies through mergers and acquisitions, and you'll have to let people go, potentially. HR would manage that process. You'll need to know how to manage the communications that come with all of these changes to your employees, which HR is well versed in. Doing this without HR may severely impact your retention and brand. So, there's lots of complexities here when you're thinking of how to manage a business and people internationally. It's very important to keep HR involved each step of the way. And it doesn't mean these are the exclusive aspects you need to focus on in each phase of business. There are ongoing needs that will happen annually, like compliance of employee records, company policies and manual updates, performance management, which happens on an annual basis, compensation and benefits assessment to make sure that it's at a fair market value, and keeping tabs on the economy and how that may influence changes to your work environment, as we talked about earlier with the pandemic. So these are just some of the changes and things that you need to be aware of when it comes to HR and your business. For those of you in the first two categories, that startup and growth phase, it's still good to understand mature and global business functions because you should be thinking big and preparing for the abundance in your business. Now let's take a look at common mistakes companies make with HR in each phase of business. The early phase. For companies in those early phases, it's a lack of investment in HR altogether. Not understanding the need for HR or thinking through the risks of not having HR. I understand for most of you, it's not intentional. You don't know what you don't know. But now that you know, make sure you're investing in HR. Having no employee documentation in place and hiring without it, which can lead to legal and compliance issues. All of your company documents should be established upfront and presented to new employees during the onboarding process. That's pay and benefits forms, employee handbook, policies, procedures, and the like. Failure to plan for future hiring. Everyone's heard the saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Nothing is more true for a business than not planning for the people they will need. It will result in poor hiring choices and an ultimate waste of your time and money. Employment branding. You want to set the mission, vision, and values of your company early. This will eventually become a part of your value proposition, which is why people want to work at your company. This also sets a standard for your company culture and your company's underlying ethical and behavioral standards. A lot of times people aren't thinking about this at all because they're in a rush to hire someone, but say that person steals your client's proprietary information and they're like, hey, I didn't know that was a problem. You have to set guidelines for what your company stands for and what type of practices are acceptable or not, because hiring one wrong employee that does something unethical can completely ruin your brand. In the growth phase, no processes in place. It's going to be really important to have processes in place as your business grows. People may leave and you'll have no information on how they perform something because it's not written down. So you spend a lot of time trying to figure this out and it leads to operational nightmares. This is something that HR helps ensure is in place, and it often gets overlooked at this phase because you're purely focused on getting work done. Rapid hiring. I see this the most. As a business owner, a lot of times they'll say, I don't need someone right now, and not think much of it until they need to hire 10 people yesterday to support a major project. You don't want that to be you. Anything you do in a rush, you will sacrifice your quality. You can't afford to have bad quality employees, so remember, preparation is key. Ineffective onboarding. Some of this goes back to having the right documentation in place, making sure employees sign off on policies, that they acknowledge the company handbook and the contents in it. This will ultimately protect your business and limit your liability for any conduct your employees do that's unprofessional, especially on social media. We've all seen instances where someone does something egregious and it goes viral. Perhaps they made a racist remark or harassed someone. People find out where they work. Now that behavior is affiliated with your brand and you go into damage control. So having documents that require employees to acknowledge when they come on board what a code of conduct is for your company is crucial. Lack of training in a mature company. You have to invest in your employees, especially in a mature business. You can never get too comfortable in business. You always have to be thinking about what trends are upcoming, what skills you and your team need to remain competitive. Again, that's at any phase, but especially in the mature phase when your company has made a name for itself in the market. Not updating your policies and processes. So it's great, you've developed policies and processes and an employee handbook, but that's not enough if you never revisit it. Laws change, technologies change, regulations change. And with these changes requires a change in your documentation. This is very important because if you don't have documentation that needs to be updated by law, you can be in serious trouble and subject to different fines and penalties. But also, if you want to implement a new system and you don't update related processes, you're going to have processes related to an outdated system, and then you can't train effectively. Lack of competitor research. You have to understand what's going on in the market. Just as you have to evaluate what's going on in your core business, the same applies to HR. As a business matures, you need to look at the competitiveness of your salaries and benefits in comparison to your peers and any upcoming trends related to what employees value, because that will differ as new generations enter the workforce. Remote work was reserved for very few companies pre-pandemic, and now it's become a mandate for many people. So it's important to understand what's happening in the outside world and how that will impact your company. It's important to be proactive and not reactive. This is really important because it's strongly linked to attraction and retention of new and existing employees. Not having a succession plan. Succession makes sure that there's business continuity, which basically means the business can keep going if someone leaves. So, if someone who has a key role in the business, say a chief accounting officer, does not have a backup who's trained to take over, that could potentially cause a collapse of the business because it may result in your finances not being accurate. So it's important to work with HR on having a succession plan for the key players in your business. At the global phase, inconsistent employer cultures. You may have started your company in the US and established a particular way of doing business. But what happens when you expand globally? Regional cultures vary based on customs, laws, languages, and that certainly infiltrates into a company. So if there's no consistency of the overall company culture through the mission, vision, and values that were established in the beginning, you'll have inconsistent ways of doing things. And that can be how a company gets into trouble as well. Now, there may be some variation based on what local laws and customs dictate, but the overall culture and feel should be the same regardless of where your company is located. Improper org changes. With global changes come staffing changes. That may require new specialists, new leadership, and changes in positions. As the company strategy changes, so does the org structure. And that needs to be set before you even think about trying to expand into other regions. This is, of course, something that HR specializes in. Also, multiple HR systems. Systems need to be consolidated when you have multiple locations. The systems need to talk to each other to make sure that pay structures are aligned. Remember, we talked about all the different withholdings by state, never mind country. And if employees transfer locations or jobs from one region to another, you need to make sure that their pay, benefits, and performance history is captured in a centralized system. All of these areas are things that HR is responsible for, and these are just some of the common mistakes companies make at different phases of maturity, which is why it's so important to make sure that you are consulting HR each step of the way. So, how do you make sure your business is successful using HR? Well, first, consult an HR expert or an HR company to review your HR needs in each phase of your business. HR should be a part of your strategic planning process. You don't know what you don't know, and you can't always Google everything. Every business is unique and has different needs, so it's really important you find an HR partner to give you some insight on what you need to be thinking about for your business and to help guide you through some of the challenges you may face. Next, budget for hiring growth. I know we're all on a budget, especially when we first start. But when you are at the point where you're ready to hire, there's nothing worse than not having the budget for it. So make sure you set aside funds to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to be overworking yourself and your current staff if you have one. Also, when you're hiring, you need to understand market pay. Go on Glassdoor, Indeed, LinkedIn, or other job sites to see what the market rate is for the type of person you want to hire. Don't ask for an accountant at $17 an hour and expect someone with superb experience. Remember, this is your business, so you have to invest appropriately in the people you need. And finally, understand the core functions of HR and your business. I can tell you that we offer HR training to entrepreneurs, and oftentimes they'll say they don't need it. And I get it, it's a headache, it's not all that interesting. But it is very important that as a business owner, you have a solid understanding of all functions in your company, because if you don't, you won't know what expertise you'll need. And most importantly, you'll have no knowledge to challenge the person you're working with. So, say you have an accountant who does your taxes. You should still do a double check of those numbers to make sure that the entries are correct before it's submitted. This doesn't mean that you need to be an expert, but you should have enough knowledge to make sure that the numbers aren't off, because otherwise, you'll be liable, not them. Remember, you put blood, sweat, and tears into your company, and you're responsible for protecting it. So you have to know what's going on in all areas of your business and what each person you're hiring does so that you can effectively challenge them. That's how you establish your competence and professionalism in business.